Hello and welcome to Improving Scottish Football. My name is Kieran, and today on the podcast I'm joined by Rachael Boyle, who currently plays for Hibs Women and has 43 caps for Scotland. Rachael is going to be giving us a great overview of the current state of the women's game in Scotland. We're going to be talking about what it was like when she was a kid growing up and how she would like to see it develop in the future. We're also going to be talking about what the men's game could potentially learn from the women's game. In particular, talking about some of the tactical and technical ability that's on show. And for a bit of context on this, if anyone watched the Women's World Cup, there's no doubt that you could fail to be impressed by the way that some of the teams played. I mean, if you look at Spain in the final, for example, against England, the way they played was sensational. It was free-flowing, one-touch, attacking football. It was absolutely brilliant. They weren't hoofing it up the park for the big person to flick onto the little person to win the second ball. Let's put it that way. So what is important is that the World Cup, the success of the World Cup, and the growth of the women's game in general is inspiring a whole new generation of young girls and also young boys who are beginning to watch it as well. And it's going to help us to produce some more great players, because we've already got some superstars, obviously. Caroline Weir at Real Madrid, Erin Cuthbert at Chelsea. You've got Sam Kerr, who's just gone to Bayern Munich, and Emma Watson, who's just gone to Man United at the age of 17. So all this is really exciting. Please do like, share and subscribe to the podcast. Please continue to spread the word. And now that that's all been said, it's on to the show. Right, hello everyone and welcome to the podcast. Today I am delighted to be joined by Rachael Boyle. Rachael, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be back training. So yeah, delighted.
Good. Okay, well, let's kick off with that then. Give us a little bit of an update as to kind of where you are with your injury.
Yeah, so I'm probably about 5-6 months post-op. So a lot of heavy work in the gym and trying to build up strength and things, and slowly getting back out onto the pitch and doing a couple of running sessions and things. So yeah, slow progress, but definitely a lot better than where I was a few months ago.
Yeah, and it was an ACL injury, is that right?
It was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not a nice one. So I would love to just give everyone a little bit of an overview about yourself. So do you mind just giving us a bit of an overview of your career?
Yeah, so obviously started playing very young with my brother and the boys throughout my school days. And then once I got to the age where I was too old to play with the boys, I then moved into girls football, which I knew nothing about at the time. And then I got pushed along towards Aberdeen girls, and that's basically where my footballing journey started. Got involved with them, played, I think it was under 17s for about a year. And then the women's team very quickly wanted me in. So I went and played women's football from I think about the age of, I think it was about 15. And ever since then I've been in the SWPL. I've played for Aberdeen. I've went to Forfar for a brief spell, back to Aberdeen, and then I travelled south and came to Hibs, and I've been enjoying it here ever since.
Nice. And you've picked up a couple of trophies while you've been at Hibs, right?
Yeah, I have. That's been nice.
Yeah. And 43 caps for Scotland?
I think that's where I've ended up at, yeah, before the pregnancies and the injuries. So yeah, doing not too bad.
Yeah, well, this is it. Obviously, something that, male footballers just don't have to deal with at all. And we'll probably come on to that kind of topic a little bit later on in the episode. Give us a bit of a kind of flavour as to the progression of women's football in Scotland, if you don't mind, Rachael, because I imagine when you were younger and when you started playing, things were quite different.
Yeah, very different. When I first started, as I say, I wasn't really aware of the women's game at all. When I was growing up with the boys, it wasn't until I got a little bit further down the line and I started to recognise that there was actually a women's league, and once I became a part of that, you started to learn some players' names like the elites. So growing up, you always knew of Julie Fleeton. I think everybody knows that name in Scottish football. But then once you get more involved, you start to see there's other players and other teams that are such prominent players within the women's game and really help develop it throughout the years. And I think that's what we're seeing now, the rewards of those players, the hard work that they put in to try and grow and expand the game. Obviously been carried on throughout the generations. And I think now we're at a point where it's not a hobby to people anymore. Obviously, everybody that's playing the game still loves the game, but they can now do it as a job, which is truly incredible progression from where I've started. And I wish I was a few years younger to allow myself to do that more full time for longer. But the opportunities that kids have got now to say I want to be a footballer when I grow up is incredible. And yeah, it's really exciting to see. So I think the progression in the women's game in Scotland has definitely grown massively. I do believe there's still a long way to go for it to compete with the top leagues in the world. But yeah, for where we're at from where we've been, it's truly a magnifying huge difference within the game.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see it grow and to see so many young kids, be inspired, and not even just, young girls, even young boys, watching women's football, obviously watching the World Cup that's just, that's just happened. It's so brilliant to see that new generation be inspired. You mentioned about there's still a long way to go compared to the kind of the top leagues. Just kind of give us a little bit of describe kind of the main differences, if you like. I mean, how far does the Scottish women's game still need to go to kind of catch up?
I think it's quite far off. Obviously, we've got a lot of progression, as I said, with the broadcast deals that we've got with BBC Alba, BBC Scotland, really starting to invest. And I think Sky have now started to implement a couple of games a season and things as well. In comparison to that, you've got the WSL down in England, which has really took off, and it's incredible to see the growth that they've had in such a short space of time as well, and to have their broadcast deals with Sky, and the magnitude of the clubs that they've got down there is huge. And I think for us, we're looking at growing attendances first and foremost. We think we need to draw in fans into the game and want them to come along week in, week out, because in the big occasions, we saw it last year, fans were turning up in their numbers when it was the special occasions. I think Celtic hold the record now, previously held by us. So it's good to see that clubs are really trying to branch out and draw in the fans. So hopefully we can build on that this season. It obviously does help with the competitiveness of the league, the fact that 3 teams were still competing on the final day of last season for the SWPL. That's huge for drawing an interest into the league. So I would like to see us kick on from that and maybe have a few more teams competing there or thereabouts. And yeah, that's only going to help grow the women's game. But certainly from a broadcast and a media point of view, it's huge to have these sorts of TV deals and be able to expand the audience.
Yeah, I think the TV coverage is obviously a huge step. I think the highlights package that the BBC put together is great. And yeah, as you say, I think Sky are showing the occasional game. I think there's a Celtic Glasgow City one coming up shortly. Do you need greater integration, do you think, between men's and women's football in Scotland?
I think a lot of clubs are starting to integrate now. Obviously ourselves, we're now based solely at the training centre, which is huge for us as a club. The facilities here are incredible. So I like to think that other big teams are doing it. I think Rangers are doing it, potentially Celtic. And the fact that we get to use the facilities as well as the stadium, it's a fantastic occasions. I think it's ones that fans really turn up for. I know in our own experience when we're playing at Easter Road or we go to Tynecastle, these occasions are really looked forward to, not only by players and staff, but also by fans and family alike. So these are the occasions that players want to be a part of, and that's helped by the clubs being so understanding and so accepting of the women's team that they want to showcase these games. So I'd like to think across the board, this is going to happen more and more for the other teams. But then you look at Glasgow City, who don't have the backing of a men's team, and how well that they do domestically and European as well. So I think it shows that it can be done if you've got the right structure and the right fan base and everything behind you. And they've obviously got some incredible people that work at the club and work really hard for them to bring in the revenue to allow them to do these great things.
Nice. So you're based at Hibs main training centre then?
Are, yeah.
So you'll occasionally see your husband there then?
Yeah, we come and go. We basically hand over the kids in the car park and get on to training. So
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, this possibly brings us quite nicely on then to to the aspect of pregnancy, of childcare, all these things. I mean, I'm a dad myself, so I know a little bit about obviously how much kids completely change your life, but I can't even begin to imagine the decision making process that as a professional football player, women's football player, you have to make sacrifices for your career. So do you mind just kind of talking a little bit about that kind of process?
yeah, so obviously we fell pregnant with my first child, coming up 5 years ago now, which we weren't overly trying. It just kind of one of these things that happened, and it was one that we were delighted about. But I think it was around the time that Scotland had just qualified for the World Cup, and I knew that I was never going to be a part of that. And you're sitting there and you're delighted for the girls, but on the same time you're thinking, oh, I wish I was kind of still playing. But yeah, I think I said at the time something that I would never ever change, to be holding my daughter and they're qualifying for the World Cup. It was truly incredible. And yeah, I think from that moment on, I've always said, like, my kids come first and foremost. If there's something that clashes, they will always be the priority. But I have incredible friends and family around me that allow me to come to training and to know that they're taken care of while I'm out of the house. And yeah, it's special. I think there's a few games where they've came along, and I think more recently I got injured, obviously, but just before that they came to my first game back after having my second child, and to come off the pitch and see their little faces, it just kind of puts everything into perspective. I feel like I'm more balanced with a family behind me because I'm not just solely thinking of football all the time. When things are going wrong, you can kind of switch off from it when you go home, and you've got them to take your mind off it. But equally, when things are going right, you can go home and celebrate with them, and they're just as happy for you. So yeah, I think it's a challenge, don't get me wrong, but it's one that I'm really enjoying, and I'm hoping that I can inspire them to believe that they can grow up to do anything that they want to do and put their mind to. So
Yeah. And when you returned from mat leave, the second time, was that when you scored with your first touch after returning from mat leave?
yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a special day. I kind of knew going into the game that I was going to get some sort of minutes depending on how the game went. And I knew that I wasn't fully fit and I wasn't at my best. But for me, I personally believed that if I get back on the pitch, and then everything else will kind of just fall into place. And it did that day. It was a good day. Obviously won and got the 2 goals and came off the pitch and they were there. So yeah, I was able to show them that. But then we lead into the next game where the injury happens and life just kind of gets sucked out of you again. But here we are, we're building back up, and hopefully we can get back on the pitch soon enough.
Yeah, brutal. Honestly, the next game, that's rough. Is it 2 girls you've got?
Yeah, 2 girls.
Okay. I mean, again, just looking back, I guess, to when you were growing up, and obviously now that your girls are growing up, the thought that they could, potentially, if they wanted to go down that route of being, a professional footballer, for example, is just amazing. Now, it just demonstrates the progress that the women's game has gone on, I guess.
Yeah, it's huge. The opportunities that girls have got now is massive. I think you can see there's still girls breaking through at young ages into the women's first team, and that's massive for Scotland. I think we need to develop more players, and I think we'll start to reap the rewards in maybe 10, 15 years' time. You'll start to see the girls that are just starting out now. They're then going to be the future of the Scotland women's national team in years to come. So I think the more girls we can get playing now, and a few years down the line, we'll start to see the rewards of that. And I think we can see already a few that have broken in. I think off the top of my head, you've got Emma Watson turning up for Scotland and absolutely flying. So yeah, she's an incredible talent, and I think we've got many more like her that just need that opportunity and that platform to perform. But yeah, so far so good. It's looking positive for the future.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's so much talent within the national side. How is the national side kind of looking in general? Obviously, didn't qualify for this year's World Cup, but presumably looking optimistically towards the next tournament?
Yeah, definitely. I don't see why not. The talent that is in that team is truly incredible. You've got players like Caroline Weir, Erin, Cuthbert, playing on the world stage on a weekly basis. And they are truly, truly top talents. To have them within the squad and gelling in with the new younger players coming through is going to be huge. And I think Pedro's now starting to get his philosophies through to the squad, and you can start to see the difference from where he first started to where the team is now. I think the progression's been huge, and you can start to see an identity to them, and the work rate that he's got them playing at is huge. I think they've got some tough games coming up with England first and foremost, so I know the girls will be right up for that one and really looking forward to challenging themselves against what we've seen as the second best team in the world right now. So yeah, it's massive. But I do think in years to come we need to be a team that's competing regularly in these major tournaments, and the only way for that to happen, as I say, is the development of the domestic game. And if we can get the players starting young and build them up through, then I think we'll see a longevity to that in terms of qualification.
And in terms of kind of growing and developing that domestic game, then is it just about kind of trying to inspire young girls to get involved with football and just making sure that there are the pathways through to first teams?
Yeah, I think it's also accessibility, isn't it? You don't want somebody not able to play because they can't make it to their local team through travel or support. So it's about making sure that all girls have got access to sport, whether that's football or any other sport. I think schools is a major part. If they can get it instilled in schools that girls are seen as being acceptable to play football and it's not just predominantly a boys' sport, then that's massive, and it goes a long way to keeping them within the game.
Yeah, this is, I think, still probably quite a big issue in football. Maybe not just specifically Scottish football, but probably wider than that, is that, yeah, unfortunately, it still is seen as a bit of a boys' sport. I've got friends who have said that, if they're going to see men's football matches, for instance, they feel unwelcome. They still feel like it's a boys' club. So it's trying to break down that barrier and ensure that that young girls see that it is a sport for all. Do you kind of still get a sense that we are a bit stuck sometimes in that kind of backward way of thinking, where it is just a kind of boys' club?
Yeah, I think opinions are changing, don't get me wrong, but I think we've still got a long way to go in that sense. I mean, it was just the other week I was having this conversation with my 4-year-old, and she says, I don't want to play football, mummy, because that's for boys. And I says, well, your mum plays. Like, you've seen mummy and her friends playing at training. Like, I take her along as much as I can. Like, that's coming from her. So yeah, it's difficult. You can't stop what they do in the playgrounds when they go to school and they go to nursery and things like that. It's, if it is the boys that are playing with the ball, then that's all they see. But yeah, I think it's huge in terms of if we can accept it and have those mindsets that, yeah, girls can play football. And I think we saw that with the World Cup. I don't know how many people I spoke to throughout the tournament that have said, oh, we've been tuning in and we like X, Y, and Z players, and this team's really good, like, surprisingly. And yeah, I think it's huge for people that wouldn't normally watch women's football to then be able to turn on the TV and see such a huge global sport played in front of record audiences is massive, and it does develop a change in mindset, not by everyone, but by most. I think people are starting to grasp the fact that if you treat men's and women's football the same, then you might never like women's football, because it is predominantly a little bit slower. Just purely because the physical man is a lot quicker, a lot stronger. However, if you break it down and you look at the tactical and technical aspects of both sports, there's been times where I've preferred to watch a women's game because technically and tactically they're a lot more equipped than what some maybe men's teams are. So yeah, it just depends what you're looking for out of the sport. And if you are just there to blow off steam and shout at some people, then yeah, you'd maybe go down the men's route and go and shout at some players. But you come to a women's game and it is a lot more accepted, and you can see kids running about the side and enjoying themselves. And yeah, I think a lot of people that I have spoke to do enjoy coming personally to our games, because that's who I've had conversations with, but they do enjoy bringing their families and they can afford to bring their families to our games, whereas maybe the men's, it's a little bit more expensive, a little bit more reserved, where you have to sit in your correct seat because there's not a lot of space. And obviously we want to grow attendances to the point that they can't just run around. But for the meantime, if it's going to bring people in the door, then you want to allow that accessibility to get to the players and be able to see what they're aspiring to be.
Yeah. And the quality that was on show at the World Cup was honestly phenomenal. I mean, the final between Spain and England was brilliant. The way Spain played was, I mean, you can't be a football fan and not appreciate how the quality on show, which is just brilliant to see and shuts a lot of people up, quite frankly.
It does, but yeah, as you say, the quality was incredible, and I think it really showed how far the women's game's come, because I think when I first started watching women's football years ago, and maybe the teams that were playing, it could have been double figures in these sorts of tournaments, but the gap between the so-called lesser nations and the bigger nations was massively closed in that tournament. And I think that's what made it so exciting. You just never knew which way it was going to go, and some major teams got knocked out early doors, which really blew the whole tournament wide open and allowed a lot of lesser teams, as you say, to come through and really showcase what they're all about. And yeah, it was fantastic to see.
Yeah, and as we've said, hopefully some of the mentalities in Scotland are beginning to change. Unfortunately, I think there are still plenty of people who have very old school views. We've seen the likes of Tam Cowan write, derogatory articles. We had the issue with the, the Writers' Awards, which was about a year ago, making misogynistic jokes. It's amazing how this is still prevalent in society. But, the sooner these sorts of people get kind of flushed out of football, the better.
Yeah, I think, as you say, it's disappointing to see and to hear those sorts of things. But everyone is entitled to their opinion. It's just how you go about expressing that opinion. For me, don't get me wrong, nothing against cricket, but I do not understand the sport, and it's not something I would choose to watch. But I wouldn't then go on and post online how much I hate cricket and it shouldn't be played and it shouldn't be on TV and it shouldn't be this. Like, for me, if you have an opinion like that, just keep it to yourself. You don't need to be then posting it just to try and get some likes and things on social media. And I think we see a lot of that. It is disappointing, and as you say, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but for me, I think there's certain ones that you can keep to yourself and not really be posting about socially for everyone to see.
That's a very diplomatic way of putting it, Rachel. Cool. All right. I think we're getting to the end of this podcast, but before I let you go, Rachel, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about Scottish football, whether it's the women's game or Scottish football in general, what would it be?
I'm going to say for women's football, I would probably wave my wand and have it to be as big as what probably the men's game is. Not in terms of like the wages that some of these top players are getting, although that would be nice. I just want it to be accepted on a global stage for everyone to want to come. I think we see it with certain games where tickets are hard to come by, and to me that would be the pinnacle of women's football. If you could get a game that's almost a sellout and people are scrambling to try and get tickets to come along week in, week out, and you've got season tickets filling up stadiums. Like, for me in women's football, that would be success. That would be when we've reached the top and think, right, we've done it. We've grew the game as far as we possibly can, and now it's just about maintaining it. So yeah, I would want the women's game to be played in stadiums equivalent to what the men do, week in, week out, not on these astral pitches that give you ACL injuries. Not saying that's a cause, by the way, but yeah, for me, the big occasions are the best occasions. And if we could do that on a weekly basis with the amount of fans that we could stream in through the gates, would be incredible. Can't see it happening in my lifetime, in my career, but hopefully for generations to come, that would be the case.
Yeah, well, I think that's an excellent magic wand answer. I think hopefully it's only going one way, and hopefully it won't take generations. Hopefully in the next few years, certainly we can really kind of ramp up attendances. get potentially better TV deals. So fingers crossed, it will all go positively. And obviously for yourself, I'm fingers crossed that your return from injury doesn't take forever, and when you come back, you can kind of hit the ground running, I guess.
I would like to think so, yeah. Hopefully in a few months' time I'll be back involved and get some sort of game time, but we'll see how we go in the next few months in the gym.
Brilliant. Okay. Listen, Rachel, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks very much for being on the podcast.
No problem. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
So I wanted to do a bit of an outro to the podcast to expand on a couple of points that we made. I'll start out by the reference I made to Tam Cowan. He wrote an article a few years ago, and it was called "Fir Park Should Be Torched After It Hosted Women's Football." And in it he says things like, "Why do they persevere with this turgid spectacle? Face it, folks, nobody cares about women's football." Now, honestly, I can't believe that he wrote this in a mainstream newspaper, and he was suspended briefly by the BBC, but the guy is still employed in the mainstream media. He is a dinosaur. He needs flushed out of the system, quite frankly. It's sexism, potentially misogyny, masquerading as banter. You know, he thinks he's being hilarious. Ha ha ha, let's appeal to the blokes. Let's all have a laugh at women. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing that this guy wrote it and that he got it published. And he was then defended by other people. There was an article that then appeared in The Guardian from Kevin McKenna, who says Tam Cowan's column about women's football was not his best, but he hardly deserved to be hounded by a media lynch mob. And then just last year, just to prove that it is still a relevant conversation that we need to have here, Bill Copeland made sexist remarks at the Scottish Football Writers Association Awards, which led to Ailey Barber walking out and others, and saying she'd never felt so unwelcome in the industry. And while she was walking out, other people were still laughing at this guy's jokes. So there's a lot of work to be done for people to realise what's acceptable and what's not. And then, of course, you've got the Spanish president, Luis Rubiales. You know, that's a very modern day example of the stuff that women face on a daily basis. And like I say, it's not just footballers. Sexist behaviours exist everywhere in society, but we all need to be a part of this fight. It's not just for women. It's something for us all to be involved with. And just in case you are thinking, oh, that's just Spain. Well, I actually saw an article in the Herald said Luis Rubiales was a gent at Hamilton Academical. It's hard to believe he's involved in this. Well, first of all, I didn't realise he played for Hamilton, which he did, which is a bit of a crazy bit of information. But somebody thought that was an acceptable headline to write in, again, mainstream news in Scotland. Imagine writing that and thinking, yes, that's the correct stance I'll take. Thankfully, the world is changing, but it's clear that there's still some people resistant to change, clinging on to things and attitudes that they previously could get away with. And then when they're getting called out on their unacceptable behaviour, they're crying it's cancel culture or woke behaviour. I'm afraid, they're the ones that are in the long term going to be proven wrong, and history will show them as dinosaurs, sexist dinosaurs. I mean, that's the polite way that I can put it. So there we go. That's a bit of a rallying call for all of us. We do just need to, and I'm talking to men really here, we all just need to be better, and try and move things along. A big thank you to all of you for listening, especially if you've got to this point. I hope you all really did enjoy the chat with Rachel, and let's all of us try and get along to more women's football in Scotland. The next episode coming up, if I do say so myself, is a really good one. It's with David Weatherston, who's based in Norway. And we're going to be talking about the differences between Norwegian football and Scottish football, and what our clubs could potentially learn from the likes of Bodo Glimt and Molde, who are basically, tiny clubs from small towns. What are they doing right, in terms of tactics, in terms of coaching, player trading models, and academies? We're also going to be finding out how the hell Norway are producing Haaland and Odegaard and the likes. So really good chat that we've got coming up. It'll be out in a couple of weeks. Like I say, the podcast comes out every fortnight on a Monday. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you share it when it does come out. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's improve Scottish football.